As of 2025, abortions are fully banned in 13 U.S. states.
Across the country, there are massive pro-life rallies, anti-abortion lessons in schools, and doctors who decide to help with terminating a pregnancy face serious prison time. But does this boost the nation's demographics? Does the share of happy large families really increase because of it? We're in Washington at this women's rights rally, and judging by it, it feels like something here is off.
Dear future kid, definitely starting to look a bit more pregnant. Total weight gain at this point somewhere between 5 to 7 pounds and seemingly all in my belly. Things I'm grateful for today. Went on a walk in beautiful fall weather alone. Your dad was busy with work, but I'm glad I went anyway. I listened to a lullaby playlist and thought about you a lot. For 2 bowel movements, pregnancy constipation is no joke. Only 1 more week till the halfway point, which is simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. There are many things that could go wrong, but the most likely scenario is that in a little over 4 months, I'll be holding you. External to me as you begin to absorb and learn to parse an overwhelming flood of information. I keep journals. I'm a journaler, but I guess I knew I wanted to keep some kind of record of what pregnancy was like, and I decided to write weekly letters to my baby. I can't say I always wanted kids. My entire reproductive life up to that point, trying very hard not to get pregnant, like taking birth control and trying to figure out what the right birth control methods were. To then, when I met the man who I married, who I knew he wanted kids, and so by the point that I married him, it was like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. But I was still very. So I was pretty naive going through, especially the first part of my pregnancy, and mostly just like, I was really happy I didn't have a miscarriage, especially as we got past like 10, 11, 12 weeks. So then I guess it was 18 weeks when I had my first anatomy scan, and that's when they were first like, there was a measurement that it was at the upper end of normal. And they were even like, the doctor who examined the scans and everything said, we don't even have to bring you back, but I would feel better. So why don't we have you back in 4 weeks? I'll be able to see a little bit more. And I was like, well, okay, but what, what are you looking for? Like, what if it's not good? And he said, like, I still, the things that haunt you. Maybe they'll need a little more help in school, something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. No problem. Right? Like, I can handle that. We can get some tutoring. And so when I went back for that scan, like 4 weeks later, I'll never forget her face, right? That's the thing that tells you is like, the look on that doctor's face was like, oh, I could tell that whatever she was gonna tell me, she was worried about how I was gonna react. At that point, it was still very unclear. All they could tell me is that there were things going on in my baby's brain development that were not normal. There are babies that have things go not quite right in their brain development that still have a good quality of life, but you're now on a different road right now. And I knew abortion was legal kind of early in a pregnancy, and I think I had never actually questioned, at what point is it not? But when they saw problems at 22 weeks, they immediately let me know that if I wanted to end my pregnancy in Michigan, I had to do that before 24 weeks. And it became pretty clear that we might not know what was going on with my baby's brain. They're telling me maybe 60% chance my baby might be okay, another 30 to 40% chance that it's not okay, but that's the best they can tell me. But I waited because I couldn't have an abortion with a 60% chance maybe my baby could be okay.
While Michigan biologist Margot was waiting for an exact diagnosis, on the other side of the country, factory worker Nancy Davis was already hearing a devastating verdict.
In August of 2022, I went through one of the most difficult, heartbreaking experiences of my life. We decided to have another baby. And so I was blessed enough to be able to do just that. And I was really, really excited. We had literally a dance party inside our home. The vibe was like Christmas time. Even my youngest daughter, she was 1 at the time, she was happy and laughing, and she felt the positiveness throughout the house. My very first exam was when I found out that something was wrong. So I had an appointment. It was literally just supposed to be a checkup. You know, your very first appointment. I go in a room, unbutton my clothes, and so the tech began to scan. She began to scan my stomach. And so I noticed some unusual images, like something that I've never really seen before. And I noticed the head, half of my baby's head was missing. I was asking the tech, I was like, oh my goodness, why does my baby look this way? You could literally hear her breath taken away from her. She was like, and she put her hand on my shoulder and she was just rubbing my shoulder and she was like, these are the special cases where you can have an abortion. Sorry.
Nancy Davis was in her 10th week of pregnancy when, during an ultrasound examination, physicians identified a crania. The fetus lacked the skull vault, and the brain was forming abnormally. As a rule, such babies do not survive until birth. Doctors recommend terminating the pregnancy. But in Louisiana, where Nancy lives, abortions are completely banned.
And whenever they told me I was denied, all I could think of is they are really making me carry my baby to bury my baby. That's inhumane. Like, it's already painful enough coming to terms that your baby will not survive outside the womb. And we are seeing it more and more and more these days.
The situation that happened to Nancy became possible in part due to the long-standing efforts of this woman and her husband. American patriots Joe and Ann Scheidler spent more than 40 years trying to ban abortions across the entire country. Today, this lady has iron arguments.
What do you usually say to women who love to say, my body, my choice?
Well, yeah, her own body, but her child is not her own body. Her child probably has a different blood type than she does. Her child has a whole different DNA than she does. It's not, her hand or her heart or her brain. It is another person. Right to life is specifically stated in our Declaration of Independence. So how you treat other human beings says a lot about who you are as a society. And we can't, on the one hand, say it was a terrible thing that we allowed slavery, but it's perfectly all right for us to kill unborn children. Both of these things are travesties, and neither of them should ever be allowed.
It sounds logical. If you don't ask questions, what if the fetus has a severe defect? What if that diagnosis threatens the mother's life? What if she is a drug addict? What if she doesn't even have money for food? Will she be a good mother if she hates her child? What if the baby was conceived through violence? What if it was incest?
You've probably heard about that. A case in Ohio sparked political controversy when a 10-year-old girl was raped. Should a 10-year-old child give birth after rape?
It's not going to kill the 10-year-old child to give birth. It is going to kill the unborn baby to have an abortion.
And many people would tell you, what business is it of yours when it comes to other people's children? What do you usually answer to that?
Because we should care about everyone, not just the people we happen to live with or happen to like, but it should be important to us that
everyone has an opportunity. Number one, everyone has an opportunity to be born and then to pursue whatever life that person wants.
Let's imagine that I am some kind of pro-choice movement mother, and you come and say, we must care about everyone. And I came to care about you and about the life of your unborn child. And I answer you, I don't want anyone caring about me. Don't force your kindness on me. What do you say to that?
Well, when you are, so an individual person, all right, you don't want me to interfere with your life, fine. But if that person is pregnant, then there's two people involved here. And somebody needs to defend that innocent unborn child. Somebody needs to care about whether that child has a chance. You know, we say, you know, the Christian people in the Our Father, referring to God, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We need to create a society in which everyone is welcome at whatever stage of life you are at, that unborn children are protected, that children who are born with some kind of an anomaly, a handicap or something.
It was called lissencephaly. So lis, smooth brain. We know what a brain looks like, the outside, right, all folded. For babies with lissencephaly, the brain doesn't fold, it stays smooth. And without all that folding, the brain doesn't function in all kinds of ways. It's a seizure disorder. They have painful seizures. Sometimes there's medication that can help moderate that, but sometimes not. So you get families that just are searching constantly for some kind of medication to alleviate their baby's seizures, and there's nothing. There's a lot of problems with choking on their own saliva. They often develop pneumonia because they have trouble clearing fluid out of their lungs. And there's also just no cognitive development. Some can make eye contact, but sometimes not even that, like no meaningful eye contact, no. Lissencephaly, if I remember right, I think it happens in 1 out of every 87,000 pregnancies. Nobody expects to be 1 in 87,000. You know, you can't expect that kind of thing. That was the diagnosis that I got at 27 weeks.
Do you remember that decision? I don't know whether it was one evening or maybe a week when you decided not to give birth to a sick child.
Yeah, because there were the 6 weeks of waiting for the diagnosis from when there was at that point, I mean, my husband and I had talked through all of the possible paths, kind of what, and really had a clear sense of what was enough to continue the pregnancy, like what amount of hope and carry the pregnancy to term. So I had an MRI at 27 weeks. And yeah, I do remember I was sitting in my hairdresser's chair when I got the call. I knew that meant that I would be flying to Colorado to end my pregnancy.
What was that conversation with yourself like?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was that sense of how am I actually going to do, how, right? And there's the path of, I could birth this child and then all of the suffering would be my fault. Mm-hmm. Or I could go have an abortion, which also these were both impossible, just seemed completely impossible. But yeah, the idea of watching my baby suffer in the ways that it had been described to me that she would suffer, and to know that I had chosen that for her. That was, I think, what, I don't know, I guess I had to focus on that to know that the alternative was the only possible one. Because I already knew that the possible futures for a child with lissencephaly were worse to me than death. That night, your dad and I went to the restaurant we love and ordered cocktails like we normally would. He asked what I do, and I said, I grieve, professionally and as a hobby. I was trying to be funny about it, but it didn't really work. The enormity of the loss hit in huge waves. I sobbed and gasped for air and asked your dad how I was ever going to make this a part of me. How was I ever going to accept that this was my life? How could I possibly swallow it all? When will I be able to string two coherent thoughts together again? Will I ever be funny again? How can I be me and still have this inside me? I feel obliterated, ripped in half, so profoundly bereft, I'm not sure who I am anymore. Love, Mom.
When a mother is told that her baby will not survive, that he will not live, or that he has such severe conditions that he may live only a few months, and there have already been many such heartbreaking cases because of abortion bans in some American states, what should the parents, the mother in this case, do when faced with such impossible choices?
If the child is going to naturally die at 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, what is wrong with letting nature take its course? I mean, there are children who are stillborn. It doesn't mean you should have killed them a month earlier. You just can't justify the direct taking of a human life by saying, oh, well, you know, later on, they were going to die.
I think that they might try to shoot it down. I remember one guy standing up and he was like, 30-something years ago, the doctor told him that his son had a condition or something like that. But he said that if him and his wife would have listened, his son wouldn't be here today. And it's like, we're two different people. You still had that option to choose what was best for you and your family. So let me have an option to choose what's best for me and mine.
In essence, there are only two questions here that divide America. From what point can this new cluster of cells inside a woman be considered a human being? And who do we give the right to decide that? To the woman carrying this embryo, or to the state, which is obligated to protect the life of every citizen, even one not yet born? What do you think?
The question of when does life begin is at the heart of the abortion controversy. Historically, the idea that all life is sacred, which is a religious concept, is one that, is deeply rooted in Judeo-Christian ethics. In more ancient times, the idea of quickening, when the first movement of the baby was the sign, that's when life began, is that first movement. In fact, abortion was made illegal in the 1800s as led by doctors who are arguing that, we're having more and more understanding of fetal development, and we know that life exists before the quickening. Mm-hmm. Now, for the philosophers, the question of personhood is maybe a good, nice separation from a human life, is whether or not it's a person yet. And some philosophers will argue that a person requires intellect and free will, and Peter Singer's argued that you're not a person until you're at least two. So he would even argue that, that for...
Anne, from what point do you believe it is a human being? From what stage of pregnancy?
A new human being is created at the moment of fertilization. When the sperm and the egg unite, you've got a new creation, a new human being. So there's no point at which it becomes a human being. It's a continuum from that moment till the moment you die. There isn't any point at which you can say, okay, today is the day you became a human being. Between the third week and the fourth, you got to start at the beginning.
First of all, there is no heart, so there is no heartbeat at 6 weeks or 8 weeks. If you look at an ultrasound, the 4-chamber heart that we know of as our heart that beats, you cannot see that fully until 16 to 18 weeks.
From what stage of an embryo's life do gynecologists consider it a human being?
So viability, the point at which a fetus can live outside the uterus, it varies from state to state. So this was when the heartbeat bill, they had tried to push this through the State House several times. And so one time, just to give visuals, I took a jar with a frozen pea in it, just a small green pea, to say, this is a 6-week fetus, a uterus without a mother to provide that, the nourishment, the blood flow, all of the things that will take this pea to become a 9-month, baby that we deliver.
You know perfectly well that before 13 weeks of pregnancy, we don't even know whether this cluster of cells will develop into a person. About 20% of women miscarry, and to say with absolute certainty that this is a future human being almost seems impossible. What do you think?
Well, the fact that some conceived embryos end up as miscarriages doesn't entitle anybody to be able to kill those who weren't by nature going to die. It would be sort of like saying, if you happen to be mad at your next door neighbor, well, they're going to die eventually anyway, I'm going to kill them and get them out of my hair now.
But if we consider both an embryo and a 5-week fetus a human being, then let's apply the full set of laws to it, right? Just like to a person. And if there's a miscarriage, well, that's a death. It happened. A person died. Then issue a death certificate.
Are you saying that if a woman has a miscarriage at home, she needs to report this somewhere to some legal entity in order to validate that a person died? I don't think it makes very much sense to try to document something like that. And whether or not you have documentation that a person lived or died isn't what confers on that person the right, to life, the right to be recognized as a human being.
Under our U.S. Constitution, that every person has a right to life, but that has always been interpreted to mean once you're born, you have a right, not to lose your life, right? And even the most conservative justices on our U.S. Supreme Court have never said it starts before birth. But there are laws in some states where, an embryo or a fetus from conception or from viability can be considered a person for some purposes, right? So for example, if a person attacks a pregnant woman and then the fetus dies and the pregnant woman doesn't, they can be considered a person for the murder laws, even though, they're not under the Constitution. Or they can be considered a person for, like we talked about, wrongful death lawsuits or something like that. A car accident, the fetus dies, there can be a lawsuit. You might have heard, for example, the state of Alabama, the Supreme Court there, decided that there could be a lawsuit brought for wrongful death against someone who I think on purpose actually, destroyed a frozen embryo that was for IVF, right? And so that actually stopped all IVF in the state for a period of time because the clinics said, we can't have the possibility of these kinds of lawsuits, and it's essentially the Supreme Court was saying that the frozen embryos were essentially people. This has been sort of the newest frontier, I think, in the abortion movement. And it's interesting though, because politically it's very unpopular to attack IVF. And even in Alabama, after the Alabama Supreme Court made that decision, the legislature reversed it.
May I propose to you a kind of experiment like this? You are standing beside a burning house. You go inside to check whether anyone is there, to try to save whoever might be inside that house. You see on the table a petri dish with 10 embryos. That could survive and grow into people, and one already born, living child. There is a chance to save only one of them. Which one would you choose?
If you have several fertilized eggs or embryos that you've created in a clinic, this is one of the issues we have with IVF, because you're probably going to create more embryos than you're going to implant and allow to come to fruition. So, what do you do with the rest of them? This is a real problem that civilization has to grapple with, because those are actually other little human beings. And when you start playing God, and you've got some pretty difficult decisions to make with what you do with these little people.
I understand that you probably do not support IVF, but I am still interested to know whom you would save, knowing that for you, an embryo is also a person. Would you save 10 embryos in a petri dish or one living child?
I would hope not to have to ever be put in a position like that. I think your natural thing would probably be to rescue the child, the born child, if you don't have any opportunity to rescue them both. But these are the kinds of problems that are extremely complicated and difficult to make a choice.
So in this case, you admit that the life of a living child is more important than the life of 10 embryos?
Yeah, I mean, that is a serious problem there. And so I would say don't create these 10 artificially created embryos, and then you don't have that problem to grapple with.
So if a 7-year-old girl is pregnant, like, how do you even know that her body can handle her giving birth? So you're not too pro-life. Then you got to care about life at all with everyone. So Louisiana don't have rape and incest in its list of exceptions. Mm-hmm. So if a 7-year-old or 8-year-old girl is pregnant, by law, she would have to have the baby. All of it makes me angry.
No matter what age the woman is who's been raped, it's always going to be a terribly traumatic thing. It's particularly horrendous when a child, but it doesn't change the reality that the child that's conceived is still an innocent victim and doesn't deserve to be killed for the crimes of a father.
Anne, but don't you think that after this child was raped, you are committing another act of violence against her? Reproductive violence. At that moment, do you think about her psychological state?
She's getting older. Someone can ask her the question about how she feels about it. So maybe she wouldn't have wanted to have an abortion. Maybe it wasn't her choice to have the abortion. Maybe that was somebody else's choice. I don't know. But the unborn baby did die for sure. And did you take away the trauma of the rape? No, you didn't.
I apologize for this example, but if something like this happened to your daughter, would you be concerned with how she is experiencing and understanding it? Or would you be concerned only with the future grandchild?
Well, I don't say I would ignore the psychological complications. I would certainly want to provide her with counseling, with lots of support, with lots of love. But I would not want my grandchild killed, no matter, who the father of the child happened to be. You're not going to find a case in which I'm going to say, okay, in that case, that child's life is worth nothing. Hard cases make for really bad law. If you make an exception that, okay, it's all right to kill this child in this case, then, okay, the next case, slightly nuanced, a little bit different, then that has to be okay too. As soon as you say it's okay in one circumstance to take the life of a child, well, we know the statistic on pregnancy from rape is approximately 1%, and everybody jumps to that argument for why abortion should be legal.
I remember vividly sitting in a cold hospital room here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my fiance and I both was there. My doctor came in and he confirmed the diagnosis that it was a crania. He told us that this is the worst case scenario. He also said that, I'm sorry to tell you all, but these babies just don't survive. He said they normally die in utero, but if he or she makes it through birth, then he or she would die within minutes. So he recommended an abortion to ultimately protect my health. So we left the appointment and we went to the abortion clinic, and we found out that they were closed down for good, being that the abortion ban had taken effect, saying that if you provide an abortion, you will be disciplined. So whether you're being fined thousands of dollars or losing your job.
In Russia, abortions are performed in a regular gynecological clinic. That is, you simply go to a gynecologist, and it is a procedure done in a standard medical facility, practically anywhere. And how was it here? Before all these bans, were there separate abortion clinics for this as well? Or was it part of general medical practice?
Mostly, so most abortions are, first of all, not provided in hospitals, but in clinics, freestanding clinics. And many of those clinics, not all, I think more than half though, I think, only provide abortions. It was very much an intentional decision by pro-abortion rights activists to say we need to have these provided because before Roe v. Wade, you could only get them in a hospital and it was very limited, only to save your life, and you had to go before, a board of doctors and convince that, they had to be convinced that it was a good case. And so activists thought it would be better to put them in these clinics so that the hospitals, who tend to be more conservative, don't have control over the decision. Right now, if there is a hospital that performs abortions, you'll probably pay $10,000 or $20,000, right? If you go to a clinic, an abortion is maybe $700. It has also, though, had a more of a negative effect in that it has kind of isolated abortion from the rest of healthcare in a lot of ways.
I've gotten a plethora of hate mail and hate on the internet, people telling me that they want to kill me, that I should die because I've had an abortion, because I help people get abortions.
A man burst into a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic and opened fire with a Canadian gynecologist.
I've been in places where anti-abortion people have tried to fight me, and we've had guns pulled on us before.
At some point, one of the protesters with a concealed carry fired back at the suspect, who ran away shortly after.
I can't believe that you were asked to go to that. Lexi Dotson-Dufo is the executive director of an abortion support fund. In the United States, this medical service is rarely included in insurance coverage. Women have to pay for the procedure out of pocket. If there is no money, Lexi steps in to help. Her fund covers everything: the abortion itself, travel to the clinic, a hotel stay, and a babysitter for older children. The fund operates on private donations and helps roughly 500 women each month. But Lexi takes a significant risk.
Our doctors that have been murdered, there are people that do get harassed. And so I try not to think about it too much. Honestly, I try, because what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? This is the work that I've chose. I'm not rich, I can't have private security, so I just go about my life.
It's a really hard job. In every clinic in the state, when they go to work, they have to drive past protesters every single day, right? They get threats often and harassment. In one of our lawsuits, we had one of the doctors come to court and testify, and she wore a bulletproof vest under her suit because she was so afraid. There was one of the doctors that I work with here in Ohio. The FBI was watching his house, providing security around the clock because they were worried. They had reason to think someone was about to target him and his family, and that they were at risk. I think the most recent might have been George Tiller, who was a physician in Kansas. Was one of the few clinics in the country that would provide even, after about 24 weeks, he would still provide abortions for some people. And he was actually shot at his church after the church service. Someone came in and murdered him in front of his wife and the congregation in the lobby of his church.
Mm-hmm. Don't kill.
What? Religious person. I know. They convince themselves that they are doing this because because they think abortion is murder, and so they think they're saving babies, I guess, from murder, right? I mean, that's the logic. It's not right.
Dr. George Tiller was killed by a man who had secretly followed him for a long time. It was an anti-abortion fanatic named Scott Roeder. He was convinced that he had the moral right to stop a doctor performing late-term abortions, and he even called himself a defender of all the unborn. In court, he openly stated that he had no regrets. The court sentenced Scott to life imprisonment.
Joe did know one of those people that was guilty of killing an abortionist. He denied doing it. It turned out he was lying. He had, in fact, done it. Joe didn't think he would have been likely to. And of course, it gave a real black eye to the pro-life movement for for all time. Really, it makes it seem like pro-lifers are violent people when we are not. We have to answer for what they've done.
This sign, Stop Abortion Now, that was designed by our founder, Joe Scheidler, it really gets fundamentally down to the idea that we're driving at. And, moving on, we've got some of, like these up here is one of our most popular signs, Dads for Life. We have a counterpart, Moms for Life sign over here. Those are kind of two of the most popular signs. We sell a lot of those. Some of these go to some interesting kind of individual campaigns we've done over the years. This one down here, Girls for Life, was from years back, the American Girl Doll company that makes dolls for little girls, partnered up with a pro-abortion young women's group. And so we started a protest that caught national and even international attention against this partnership. We got coverage in Der Spiegel in Germany, and we had these signs, and actually some of the young ladies that came out with us with their American Girl dolls to protest had a small version of this sign that their dolls held that was very eye-catching as well. Right here we have our Stand Up for Religious Freedom sign. This was from our 2012 campaign against the Obamacare contraception and abortifacient mandates.
We are pro-life, and we would like to support that life. We would like to offer the women any alternatives or any things that would help them not feel like they had to choose an abortion.
Is there any explanation for why you are standing exactly here?
Because your choice health care is here. So there's 2 abortion clinics. We try to have somebody here every hour that they're open.
Am I correct in understanding that this was also your own initiative? That members of your organization keep daily watch outside abortion clinics?
Yeah, that's what we call sidewalk counseling. It's where we get folks to simply go out to the abortion facility and offer help. We know you're coming here today to pursue one way of handling this problem, and we just want you to know that there are people out here that have other offers for you. We're fortunate to have a pregnancy resource center right across the street, offers free care. They're open right now, and they're here to help you. And usually that's about all it is. We get a few seconds between the time someone leaves their car and gets into the door of the clinic to just make that offer. We often get stories from people who call us sometimes years later and just say, hey, I drove by an abortion clinic 5 years ago, and somebody was standing out there, and because they were there, that was my sign, and I just drove by, and I just wanted to say thank you,
Here we are, you can see, here's our sign that reads, "Abortion takes a human life."
Yeah, a lot has changed, I'd say, in the 18 years or so that I've been involved in this. We were sort of at the tail end of what the pro-life movement had been in America. For the sort of maybe what you might call a first phase of it. So in the late 70s and through the 1990s, you know, doing what we used to call rescues at abortion clinics, where they would go and chain themselves to the abortion clinic doors and things like that, running into the exam rooms and knocking machinery over to, I remember one story where they got a beat up old car and drove it in front of the entrance to the abortion clinic, and they had cut a hole in the bottom, so then they did something that disabled the engine and crawled out the bottom and just left this dead car in front of the abortion facility. So people have done all kinds of crazy things.
Let's see. The very first fundraiser we ever had was a yard sale at our office. So here's, you know, people setting up with all this stuff that folks donated to sell near our home in Chicago. People out in the snow protesting at an abortion clinic. Picture of Joe at a demonstration holding a picture of an aborted baby. There used to be a big abortion clinic on Michigan Avenue that we protested quite a bit, and then we got a notice, got alerted by someone who worked there that they were throwing the babies in dumpsters in the alley. So a group of people went and recovered these babies from the garbage dumpster, and then we did a demonstration out showing the public. These are all these little tiny embryos dead.
Anne, were there situations in your practice when your life was in danger? Or when the police showed up because they were called at a clinic and you, I don't know, ended up spending several days in jail?
Well, I personally was never arrested. My husband was arrested about 14 or 15 times at various demonstrations. But the only one that ended up being really problematic, he had been at an abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida. And there was a big demonstration there, and there was talk of some people going into the clinic. Joe thought they had decided that they were not going to do that. And so he was helping to lead this protest in front of the, it was called the Ladies Center in Pensacola. And he went up on the porch of the clinic, and which was their property, of course, and was speaking to the crowd from the porch. At that point, 3 other pro-life people went into a different entrance into the clinic. He went to a convention, National Right to Life Convention, in Denver, Colorado. And when he checked in at the hotel, police officers approached him, asked if he was Joe Scheidler, and he said yes. And they put him under arrest and called me from jail in Denver. And he said, "Where do you think I am?" And I said, "In jail." He said, "Right." That was the beginning of a major lawsuit that the National Organization for Women and a group of abortion clinics brought against him. And the Pensacola incident was one of the events that they cited as a crime that he, supposedly committed, trying to interfere with women's rights to have an abortion. So that happened in 1986, and that case went on for a total of 28 years, with 3 trips to the Supreme Court.
They say you stormed clinics, blocked entrances, intimidated patients and doctors.
No, Joe had gone into some clinics, not threatening anybody, went in and, like for instance, in one case, he went to a clinic and tried to talk to the director, see the director, who apparently wasn't there, so he left a business card for that person with a note on the back saying, "Sorry, I missed you," hoping that this woman would call. She didn't, but they used that business card in the trial and claimed that that was a threat. In another case, he went into a clinic, and this was in Wilmington, Delaware, one of the local pastors had asked him to go into the clinic and talk to the woman who worked at the desk in there, because she was a Catholic. And he thought Joe, being a Catholic, should tell her that she needed to look for a different job. That was another one of the incidents that was raised at the trial of supposedly being a threat.
They say that you were using tactics resembling the methods of organized criminal groups. There were threats coming from you and destruction of other people's property.
No, we never did any of that. There were some anti-abortion people who did destroy property, but we never did that and never promoted that. The reality is that on several occasions, our home was vandalized by pro-abortionists, spray painting our house. They did that to one of our neighbors by accident one time, thinking it was our house.
You say this trial lasted 28 years. Why so long?
And that event was shown in the trial to be some kind of clandestine conspiracy trying to shut down abortion. And the first time that the case was brought to the Supreme Court, we lost completely. There had been monetary damages assessed, and so which caused another whole level of complications, because we were supposed to have to pay $300,000 to the abortion clinics, which we didn't have that money. So in order to appeal the case in the first place, we had to put our house up for collateral.
The National Organization for Women tried to use the RICO Act against Joe Scheidler, the same federal law that was traditionally used against organized mafia groups. The trial court initially found Joe guilty, but the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and after 3 consecutive reviews, the highest court dismissed all charges against him. This became one of the most significant defeats for the reproductive rights movement and a major triumph for anti-abortion activists.
What was your personal motive, Anne? Why did you suddenly begin fighting to ban abortions?
Several of the states in the U.S. had legalized abortion prior to Roe v. Wade, which came out in January of 1973. But Illinois was not one of those. Illinois was a relatively pro-life state, so we really had not faced it in our personal sphere. But my husband and I had gone to a rally that Illinois Right to Life held in downtown Chicago, and were really bothered by the fact that this was something that was legal in some of the states, New York and California and Colorado, Hawaii, it was already legal. And they passed out brochures showing what an abortion was. And it really, really affected, particularly my husband, seeing these pictures of babies who had been killed by abortion, and what a tragedy it was. We had 3 small boys at the time, and we took our kids to this rally. And then the following January, when Roe v. Wade actually was announced by the Supreme Court, I was pregnant with our 4th child, who turned out to be our first daughter, and was really appalled that my government didn't respect the life of my child, that the only way she had any value to our government was if I wanted her. If I didn't want her, then I could throw her away. Because America treasures life, we thought. It turns out we were wrong. We could get involved somehow, look for an organization where we could be active and be part of fighting this trend.
And what, legally speaking, happened back in 1973?
1973 was the year that the U.S. Supreme Court decided the case Roe v. Wade. So before 1973, abortion was fully legal in 4 states in the United States out of our 50 states. But really, in most states in the U.S., it was still completely illegal except to save the woman's life.
In the early 1960s, the abortion ban in America turned into a real epidemic of illegal procedures. Women who were unable to support a future child tried to end pregnancies themselves, deliberately lifting heavy weights. even staging falls down staircases to terminate a pregnancy. They used knitting needles and coat hangers. In 1972, feminists led by Gloria Steinem launched a series of media publications under the hashtag We Have Had Abortion, where they also shared personal stories about unsafe and improvised abortions. These stories were meant to draw attention to how tragic the fate of a woman can be when she feels forced to harm her own body in such a way. At the same time in Texas, a young woman, Norma McCorvey, learns that she is pregnant for the third time. There is no money, no support, and in her state, abortion is a criminal offense. Feminist lawyers suggest that she challenged the law. After all, according to the Constitution, a woman has the right to personal liberty. Under the pseudonym Jane Roe, Norma files a lawsuit against District Attorney Henry Wade. The major legal battle eventually reaches the Supreme Court.
In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case. It came out of Texas, and the U.S. Supreme Court decided that this violated our Constitution and that the Constitution protected a right to privacy, which included a right to end a pregnancy. And because that was out of the U.S. Supreme Court and it was under the U.S. Constitution, that meant every woman in the United States at that moment forward had a right to make her own decisions about her pregnancy.
So what happened later, over that period of time? Why is everything rolling back now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a story I think we'll be talking about for some time and trying to understand. There have been a lot of theories. So one theory is that Roe v. Wade, it was kind of too sudden. And so some people said, well, this was too much change too quickly in the US. And there was, a backlash that a response, a sort of extreme response to that, and that this really encouraged the anti-abortion movement.
And so overnight, it became, a controversial issue like, wait a minute, this has always been illegal and now suddenly it's legal everywhere. And the Supreme Court actually ruled a very extensive, broad ruling. Most countries legalize abortion for only like the first 12 weeks or 15 weeks or a certain period of time. But the Supreme Court set up what they call the trimester system. But they had to allow abortions whenever a doctor deemed it was medically beneficial, which could include any reason. Mental health claim that the doctor made, and they didn't even have to prove that there's benefit, just the doctor's goodwill belief that, this might be beneficial for her, meant they could do the abortion. So it was a very radical decision in terms of striking down all abortion regulations, and I think that really fueled a passion upon the part of those opposed to abortion. Let's get involved, which maybe, if the court had not been involved and the states had slowly started legalizing abortion and had some restrictions on late abortions, it may not have become as impassioned here as it is. But clearly,
some people have shown that actually the Republican Party was looking for an issue that it could use to win elections, and in particular to get Catholics to vote Republican, because Catholics had always traditionally voted Democratic. And so, although again, abortion had always been forbidden in the Catholic Church, it hadn't been a very big issue during the years leading up to Roe v. Wade. And all of a sudden, Catholic churches started talking a lot more about abortion. Politicians started arguing that, abortion was immoral and that this was that it was ending a life and so on. And so, that it was actually intentionally used by politicians in a very sort of cynical way in order to win elections. Since about the 1980s, it's just always one of the top political issues.
President Reagan's anti-abortion campaign gave him thousands of new voters and created a massive stigma for thousands of women. Since then, abortions have not been openly discussed, and it's not something you admit to.
It upsets me knowing that even people who are accessing the care that they want, they feel shame about it. They feel like they are horrible. They feel like this is something they can't ever tell anyone. When I went to college and I found myself pregnant, I heard about abortion. I didn't hear a lot about abortion, but everything I heard was negative, even though I didn't care. When I was pregnant, I was in a very abusive relationship. My partner at the time actually tried to end my life while I was pregnant. And during all this, all I thought was, well, I guess I'm just gonna have this baby anyway. And they were presenting, abortion storytellers were presenting, and Jordan, who I'm now best friends with, I didn't know her at the time, but she went up there and she's had an abortion and she told her story. And I don't remember exactly what she said, but she said, basically, I had an abortion. It was the best decision I'd ever made, and I don't regret it. And I remember sitting there pregnant, so just like in a place of despair because I did not want to be pregnant. And I heard that, and it was like all I needed to hear. It was just one person say, it's okay if you have an abortion. And I walked out of the conference while people were still speaking, and I called the abortion clinic, and I had my abortion. I came to Ohio and was working with abortion seekers and met other people who were having abortions and doing this work that I was like, I'm a great person for having an abortion. Like, I did the best thing for me. I took control of my future. And yeah, so I went back to college. I finished college, and just for the past 4 years have worked my way up to being executive director.
I come from a very traditional, religious family, Baptist family. I am the only girl, and it's me and 2 brothers. Abortion is stigmatized in my home state of Louisiana, especially by being a red state. A lot of people don't talk about it, and a lot of people don't agree with it. I think people have this attitude towards abortion because of, 1, their religion, also 2, they're conservative, that a lot of these people that maybe had abortion years ago or in their younger days. So I think it's kind of hypocritical.
For decades, opponents of abortion worked to overturn the Roe versus Wade decision. To do this, they needed to alter the composition of the Supreme Court, the only body in the United States with the authority to reconsider and overturn its own precedents. In 2018, in Mississippi, the state passed a law banning abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. But under federal rules at that time, states did not have the authority to introduce such restrictions. Therefore, the only abortion clinic in Mississippi filed a lawsuit against the state, arguing that the law violated Roe versus Wade, and the official representative of Mississippi in court was Thomas Dobbs, the head of the state health department. The dispute reached the Supreme Court, and at that exact moment, Donald Trump appointed 2 new conservative justices. And after the sudden death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the most influential pro-choice justice, her seat was taken by another conservative, Amy Coney Barrett. On June 24, 2022, the Supreme Court issued its decision in the Dobbs case. It overturned Roe versus Wade entirely and declared that the Constitution does not guarantee a right to abortion. From that moment on, each state may set its own rules. The Dobbs ruling became the most significant legal reversal in modern United States history. Access to abortion turned from a federal right into a geographic lottery, where everything depends on the state in which a woman resides. Since then, the map of America looks like this. Blue states are pro-choice states, those who voted for a woman's right to choose. Here, abortions are fully legal, and in some places, this procedure is even included in state health insurance coverage. In gray states, the law is either under review or there are significant restrictions placed on abortion. In red states, live pro-lifers, those who are for life, their abortions are completely banned, except in cases of threat to the mother's life. Nancy, from red Louisiana, flew to the procedure in blue New York.
What was the attitude toward you in New York? Did you feel a difference going to a clinic there versus here?
No, it was completely different. The clinic in New York, they had compassion, they had understanding, they had empathy, sympathy. I remember a particular time I was just crying in the waiting room. And Dr. Aguilar, and she called me in her office and she just rubbed my hand and just let me cry, and she just gave me some very encouraging and positive words, something that I needed during that time.
Oh, it actually was at the clinic where one of the nurses said, you know, and if you want to go out to dinner sometime this week and have a glass of wine, like you're allowed. And I remember thinking, like, it never would have occurred to me, right? Because you're not drinking because you're pregnant. Dr. Hearn does it in Colorado, and he's really pioneered the method on this because he was brave enough to provide late-term abortions at a point where very few people were willing to. So what they do is they insert, it's called laminaria, it's seaweed, into your cervix, and so that what that does is that it very gradually absorbs water. Seaweed is good at that, and so it very gradually opens your cervix. So part of the reason labor is actually so hard and so violent is you're trying to open your cervix very quickly. So to do it over 4 days is much gentler for your body. Oh, I forget what the drug that they use is, but there's a drug that they use to stop your baby's heart. It happens gently over about 3 to 4 hours. That was the hardest day of my life. That I might continue to feel kicks over the next several hours because it's not an immediate process. But much later that night, I felt something that felt like one of her kicks. And I know it was probably just like, you know, a nerve something or other, you know, like I had an injection, so all kinds of things have happened. But I just remember thinking, no, it wasn't a thought. I knew that she was dead. I knew in my brain. But when I felt that, I just wanted her to be alive. Your whole animal sense as a mother is to want your baby to be well. And then they give you the hormone Pitocin. They give you Pitocin, which is the synthetic version of oxytocin, and that's what starts the contractions. Then you deliver your baby, whose heart was stopped about a day before with a shot. They give you a lot of options for pregnancies at this stage because they know it's an emotional experience. And for people who have abortions and wanted pregnancies, they're at hospitals too. They typically treat them like stillbirths, and usually there's the option to have photographs taken. Sometimes there's a blanket and a hat that they'll wrap your baby in, and then you can take those with you. I declined everything, in part because I thought it would be easier, and there was a part of me that thought, like, no, that didn't want to categorize it in some ways as this is a pregnancy or my first child or a baby. You know, at that point it was like I almost thought I didn't deserve. I don't regret the big decisions. I know I did what I needed to do given the information that I had. But I do regret not having pictures. I regret not holding her. I thought it would be easier. There's no easier here, you know?
Stories like the one that happened to Margot are extremely rare in the United States, but they are the ones pro-lifers most often use in public debates. Look, pro-choicers are killing fully formed, completely developed children, they shout, and that means all abortions must be banned immediately.
They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that.
And when Trump was campaigning, and in the debates, abortion would come up, and he was talking about people ripping babies from their mothers or like killing them after birth and things like that. And yeah, we would come to the group and rage at each other about what, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't, but it's still really dangerous, and it feels like he's talking about us, even though he doesn't know anything about clearly any of the situations that actually lead people to have abortions in these kinds of pregnancies. So there's a lot of frustration with the ways that stories that are kind of like ours get used to try to support legislation that would prevent us from making the choices that we made for our families. Nobody out here is trying to make healthy babies die. That's not, and that kind of find me one, show me the person who really, really, really wants to end an otherwise healthy pregnancy.
As I understand the pro-life logic, these people believe that life must be protected, that an embryo is already a human being. And it seems to me, looking at it from their perspective, that you should oppose those who choose to have an abortion after a one-night stand. She got pregnant and that's it. She doesn't want the child. But when a woman has an abortion in the final weeks, she has already lived 7 or 8 months with that child. Most likely the baby already has a name. The sex is known for sure. Do you really think that in the final weeks a woman has an abortion by choice just because she suddenly changed her mind?
A short answer I think is yes. And let me just touch the one thing about the statistics, you guys didn't mention statistics, just sort of the broad strokes about those situations. To my knowledge, and you guys can show me something different if you have it, but the only study I'm aware of on motivations for late-term abortion showed that there were certainly some of those anomalous, diagnoses situations, but by and large, the women that were interviewed in the study that I'm aware of, their reasons were mostly the normal ones: economic reasons, a partner that they weren't, excited about going on with.
So a woman has carried for more than 6 months and suddenly realized she can't afford it?
My wife is a birth doula, so she, helps women give birth, and I find from her anecdotal evidence that American women are woefully unfamiliar with how their bodies work in the reproductive arena. So I think you certainly have some percentage of women who just legitimately didn't know they were pregnant, and then found out too late, and there you go. Others, part of it, if you are getting an abortion that late, not every clinic is going to do it. So there are some women who maybe found out they were pregnant and then found out their local abortion clinic wouldn't do it. And then they're chewing up time. It's day after day after day. They're not getting the abortion. They're getting further and further along to the point where, now you find yourself 20 some odd weeks pregnant, and you're having to go to the one guy in Colorado who's going to do it that late or something.
I think there's also just some people who just seem to believe this anti-abortion fiction that there are people who walk in at 37 weeks and just say, I'm tired of being pregnant. When we had a lawsuit, when the lawyer for the state questioned one of our doctors who provides abortion, one of their first questions was, have you ever performed a post-viability abortion? And he said, no, I just, it's not my practice, I never did. But, they were convinced that these were happening all the time. Elective abortions at, in the 9th month or something like that. It's just crazy, yeah.
When we get into those situations of anomalies or birth defects, that's where it becomes very difficult and very challenging, because it is a specialized procedure. And I want to clarify I would say this 100 times. There is no such thing as an abortion after 36 weeks. What those are devastating consequences where we have found something late in pregnancy that is incompatible with life. Say you have a birth defect where the heart's not going to work once the baby's born, or there's a problem with the brain development that as soon as the baby's born, it won't be able to breathe, or it won't be able to live without some sort of life support, then you provide those few hours or few days of comfort care. Nobody's murdering babies. Nobody's doing abortions at after 36 weeks or partial birth abortions. And we really need to do a better job of making sure people understand that.
Who is getting abortions in the United States today? According to statistics, most patients are women in their 20s, Black or Latina, low income, and not married. Most likely, they have already given birth to at least one child and have not previously terminated a pregnancy. The overwhelming majority of abortions take place during the first trimester of pregnancy, and so-called late-term abortions from 21 weeks and later occur extremely rarely and account for less than 1% of all abortions in America.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Just Morgan did that?
No, they messaged me in Jordan, so I'm just gonna.
Oh, that's interesting.
Morgan instead.
Okay.
Can you describe the clients of your fund? Do you have some kind of average profile of the person who comes to you?
We help the most marginalized people. You know, anyone can come to us, but on the basis, if you're coming to an abortion fund, it is because you do not have money, so you are most likely living in poverty. And so that's who abortion bans and restrictions impact the most. They impact people of color, they impact minors, they impact people who are disabled, they impact people who are dealing with the immigration system.
Every minor that has come to us has been a person of color. We've had, all of them have been Black girls and one Latina girl. But we haven't had a single white, like young women, young girls of color who come from poor families or come from families where they're forced to parent their siblings because their parents are out working. They're like, I don't want to add another baby to this household. I have a lot of babies I'm already taking care of.
If you look in the American South, that is where the majority of Black people in America live. And that is where all the abortion bans are. They want to be controlled. They didn't want to produce children to turn into slaves. There's one study that was shown that if we were to have a nationwide abortion ban, the maternal mortality rate for Black women would increase by 39%. America has one of the worst maternal and infant mortality rates in the world for a developed country. And it's vile. The reason for it is racism.
Women who are anti-abortion are choosing their race. They're choosing white supremacy over their own rights. And a lot of these women who are anti-abortion have access for themselves. So they can say, oh, my rights aren't being impeded on or being stolen from me because I can always get on my private jet, or I can always, get a ticket to some state or country where I can get my abortion. But I don't want women in communities I don't like. I don't want Black women. I don't want queer women or disabled women to be able to have access to abortion.
They want to do as many abortions on Black people as they can because they think there's too many of them. If you look at the whole history of the eugenics movement and the population control movement, and who is part of that, World Health Organization has been long involved in trying to reduce birth rates in developing countries. We need birth control, we need abortions, anything to prevent the U.S. government has been involved in funding population control around the world for decades because of targeted populations who are seen as a problem. And this, if you study the history of World Health Organization, the Rockefeller Institute, the Population Council, Planned Parenthood, they all have their roots in this idea that there's too many people in the world, especially of some subclasses.
I do feel as though in the healthcare system, there is some racism against Black women, but dealing with the abortion bans, this impacts all women, white, Black, Mexican, Hispanic, most of the individuals that make the laws are men. And some of them don't even know how pregnancy works.
I think of it that abortion restrictions are the first step to restricting a whole class of people, to creating a situation where women are second class. If it was about abortion, if it was strictly about women's health or being pro-life, then you should be willing to support contraception. You should support in vitro fertilization. You shouldn't turn around and say that those things shouldn't be supported, because the way that you create a family, the way that you allow women to be more successful is to be able to plan when they have pregnancies. If a girl is forced to get pregnant and drops out of school, doesn't finish her high school education, those girls are less likely to have a financial security. They're less likely to be able to climb the socioeconomic ladder. They're less likely to get advanced degrees. So it is a form of control.
Jesus Christ died on the cross for you. Jesus Christ died on the cross for you. His whole gets himself for that.
You know what triggers me a little bit in this whole issue? It feels to me like you place enormous responsibility on women who do not want to have children, as if they are obligated to become mothers, even if they do not want to somehow find the money to raise that child, to find the psychological strength for that child, while the man seems as if he bears no responsibility at all.
It's actually kind of a running joke that comes up on the pro-life and pro-choice discussions on social media from time to time, where some pro-choice person will come along and say something to the effect of like, what if a father was held responsible for child support from conception? What would you think of that, pro-lifers? And all the pro-lifers just pile in and go, yes, 100%, absolutely, let's do it. So, you know, that's like, yeah, we are certainly very pro-responsibility for fathers. We would be in favor of even earlier starts to child support if that could be sort of a Trojan horse aspect of abortion in America. And the way that it was brought in is that it was spoken of almost exclusively in terms of women's rights and women's bodies. It's a giant trapdoor for men's sexual freedom without responsibility, right? I mean, one of the biggest things that you run into is women facing an abortion decision and having their partner tell them, oh, well, that's your choice. I support you, whatever you choose, right? Which is seen as like a feminist man thing to do, when in reality, you're just shoving the decision on her. You know, you're just shoving all the weight, all the moral weight, all of it onto her. And if she was to say, oh, I'd like to keep the child, then we'll, you know, how many of these guys are going to stick around after that? You know, probably very few. So I'm all for legal ways and societal pressures that keep men in the picture.
But could you tell me about any initiatives of your own that are specifically aimed at men in this situation? You are not chasing them to their homes, pulling them out and telling them, come on now, take responsibility for this.
I don't have specific programs that I'm running at the moment that are directly aimed at men and not women. In our like sidewalk counseling that we've talked about, I actually find myself more often more successful with talking to the men at the abortion clinic when they are there, because I don't know, for me as a man, there's almost a little more just like equal footing. I feel I can speak more openly and more freely.
Can a man be held legally accountable for persuading her to have an abortion?
That's a great question. Short answer to your question, yes. If you coerce somebody into an abortion, you can be held legally accountable for that in the U.S., so that's possible, though I think it would probably be a pretty difficult case to like mount actually. But we have seen this as a really big problem, that there are a lot of abortions that even if they're not being directly pushed into it against their will, women would really rather not be having. And so we're very interested in seeing how pro-life and pro-choice people can come together to make sure that at least no woman is getting an abortion she doesn't want at the end of the day, you know?
So what is the result then? Has the birth rate in America suddenly increased? Has the demographic curve recently shot sharply upward?
Exactly the opposite. According to the latest data from the Guttmacher Institute, in 2023, there were 1 million abortions in America, 10% more than in 2020. Moreover, this is the highest number in the past 10 years. The sharpest increase happened along the borders of red states, and that's not surprising. People traveled to neighboring states to terminate pregnancies. In Illinois, the number of abortions rose by 72%, in Virginia by 76%, and in New Mexico by as much as 257%.
The thing with Texas, in some states, it's a crime for anyone to help you. So some cities even have made it a crime to travel through the city to help someone get an abortion, for example.
And if, for example, a taxi driver helped me get to another state.
Yeah, exactly, probably. We've even heard stories where, taxi drivers won't take patients. Right? And also we've seen situations, for example, where a patient, so let's say from Texas, travels to where abortion is banned, travels to New Mexico, has a medication abortion, goes back home to Texas, and then they can see in her record, because it's a shared medical record, that she had an abortion. And even though it's not a crime, they called like child services, the child protective services, and said, maybe she should have her children taken away or something like that because she did this thing.
Tell me, how do you feel about the Guttmacher Institute?
Oh, sure. They're very thorough. They certainly have a history of partnership with Planned Parenthood, and I think some of their analysis of their own numbers is sometimes skewed in ways that I wouldn't characterize the numbers, but by and large, I think they are at least very thorough and pretty transparent about the numbers they produce.
The Guttmacher Institute provides the following abortion figures for America: that in 2023, already after the Dobbs decision, 1 million abortions were performed in the United States, which is 10% more than in 2020, and the highest number in the past 10 years. How do you explain this, considering that the law is now on your side, and that everything now seems to be moving in the direction you wanted?
Sure. So we did see a spike. I think was a just shift in cultural sentiment. I think a lot of women felt threatened by the new laws, or even just the potential that laws might continue to change in this direction. And even if they're not in a state where the laws had changed, that I might be soon. There may well have been some abortions that took place out of fear of the new climate, out of fear that if I might not be able to get this in a few months, I better hurry, that sort of thing. Dire mood, I think, surrounding Donald Trump and some of this conservative swing. You would hear a lot of people in America talking about, I couldn't bring a child into this situation,
Do you think that banning abortions truly helps to reduce their number? I have simply looked at statistics from countries where abortions are completely banned. For example, El Salvador, Malta, Nicaragua, Poland. There, first of all, birth rates are not rising anywhere. While in Russia, for example, where abortions are legal, the number of abortions has been decreasing over the years.
Fertility rates seem to be crashing out all around the world. So I don't find it a compelling argument that changing abortion laws would be like a switch we could flip that would turn that problem around. As to the ban question, I think that's really complicated, and I'd say my views on that have changed a lot, even in the last few years. I certainly, if you'd asked me 15 or 20 years ago, I certainly would have said total abortion ban is the solution to the problem. I'm not fully convinced of that anymore, but I do think that the pro-life movement, a sort of prophetic endeavor, an effective endeavor, you know what I mean? In the sense, like, I would keep doing this whether the abortion numbers went up or went down. So I would say, I think if I'm going to be perfectly frank, I don't think we can sit here as a pro-life movement and claim that we've had massive. I think it's an ongoing struggle, and we may at some point see a cultural shift that's very large that does bring abortion numbers down drastically.
In the years since the Supreme Court ruling, where now there's kind of a patchwork across the country of abortion access, particularly in states that no longer have abortion after like 6 weeks or whatever, infant mortality has increased. The data that they had was something like there were an additional 200 and some odd deaths over the same period 2 years earlier. And 200 of the 200 and some odd were because of congenital abnormalities, things like trisomy 18 or trisomy 13, the ones that are almost always deadly. And it does seem, or the most plausible explanation, I think, that the people who've collected this data have come up with is that indeed, in many of these cases, the parents would have chosen to end the pregnancy, but they are no longer allowed to. And so what's happening, why the increase in infant mortality is babies who otherwise wouldn't have been carried to term are now being carried to term and dying after birth.
You know, I even knew somebody in Ohio. She had gone into the hospital because she was having, bleeding and problems with the pregnancy, and they said, there's a big problem. Fetus is not going to survive. And she said, okay, well, can we have an abortion? That's what they recommended. And they said, yes, but you have to wait 24 hours because we had a 24-hour waiting period law in Ohio.
What is the period?
Waiting period, like you sign the consent, okay, I'm ready to have my abortion. Okay, now 24 hours. Okay, you can have it tomorrow.
For thinking?
For thinking, yeah, for reflection.
Maybe
you changed your mind.
my mind.
Right. So she was in the hospital waiting for these 24 hours to be up, and she was in labor, and she ended up delivering before the 24 hours. And she said, the baby was born at 20 weeks or something, way too early, doesn't have lungs. She said, I held the baby while it suffocated in my arms, that it couldn't breathe. These stories are so horrible. There was a case in Texas, and this woman was in court, and she vomited when she was telling the story of how she had to give birth to this baby and watch it, struggle for breath and die in her arms. It was so traumatic.
You see what we're seeing, and the data just came out recently showing that since the Dobbs decision, all the states that had restrictions saw an increase in maternal mortality. Texas is a perfect example of that.
In Texas, 22 women filed a collective lawsuit against the state. They state that they were denied medically necessary treatment during severe pregnancy complications. 2 women claim that as a result, they lost the ability to have children. Relatives of another say she died from sepsis because doctors were afraid to perform a procedure that the law might interpret as an abortion. In Georgia, Amber Nicole Thurman died. She could not obtain an abortion at her local hospital. The pregnancy had exceeded the legal limit. She was prescribed the pills in a neighboring state and took them at home, but began experiencing complications. The nearest clinic was 4 hours away, and she called an ambulance. According to her family, medical staff refused to assist to avoid violating local law. In the same state, Candy Miller died. The mother of 3 had lupus, diabetes, and hypertension, making the pregnancy dangerous. Knowing abortions were banned, she tried to end it herself with pills ordered online. The pregnancy did not fully resolve, and she needed a surgical procedure, which, according to her family, the hospital refused. In Ohio, Brittany Watts suffered a miscarriage but was charged with murder and abuse of a corpse. Dozens of similar criminal cases have followed since the laws were tightened.
In different states, there were different stories, but many such cases are already piling up. With what feeling do you read this news, and do you think the law should be eased, at least for cases like these?
It's not the total ban on abortion that was responsible for the death of these women, that it was simply malpractice on the part of the personnel in the hospital that they went to. There is such a thing as doctors making the wrong diagnosis or doing the wrong procedure. Or there's no case in which a doctor is not allowed to give a patient whatever treatment they need to stop the bleeding or, something to save a woman's life. That is not an abortion.
Doctors will simply tell you they did not give proper care because it would have been treated as an abortion when the woman started bleeding and had already passed the specific week after which abortions are banned in that state. So they did not intervene because they could be accused of performing an abortion.
Well, maybe they shouldn't have gone into the medical profession if they're afraid of possibly repercussions if they make the wrong choice, the wrong, decision. We can't be legalizing all abortion because there's a few doctors that are afraid they might get in trouble.
How is medical education changing in the country because of the current situation? For example, are medical schools stopping teaching how to perform abortions?
Yes, absolutely, yes. The agency that accredits medical education, for a proper medical education in this field of obstetrics and gynecology, you have to be offered the opportunity to learn how to perform an abortion. And in states where it's banned, the medical schools have to figure out how to send the students to other states to get some practice. And then it's not very practical because, who's going to pay for that and who pays for the students to live in another state?
Is the number of illegal abortions rising because of this?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different now than it was before Roe v. Wade because of the abortion medication, which is actually pretty easy to get online. There are also, another thing that has happened in the US is there are doctors and nurses who practice in blue states, and those states have passed laws to protect those doctors and nurses so that they can prescribe medication to people in states like Texas and Alabama where abortion is banned.
And buying medication online, is that a gray zone, or can anyone buy abortion pills without a prescription?
Oh, well, no, it's more of a gray zone.
A friend that I had worked with many years ago, he said that abortion's still practiced with the ethics of the back alley. If you have the money, they do the abortion. They don't care if it's going to benefit you or not. And this is totally contrary to everywhere else in medicine where a doctor has an obligation to determine if you ask for something. If you go into a doctor's office, a woman goes in a doctor's office and says, I have a lump in my breast, I need a mastectomy, and he says, jump up on the table, we'll take it right off. We call that malpractice. That's not medicine. You don't allow somebody to self-diagnose, here's the treatment I need, because it could be, if they ask the proper question, well, why do you need the abortion? That is, again, just plain medical negligence, not to inquire, to learn more, to see what does she really need, what does she really want, and what will benefit her. And we have a national crisis.
There have always been illegal abortions. There probably always will be, because human nature is what it is. And if you've ever read some of the writings of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, where he tells the truth that when he was working on getting rid of our abortion laws in this country and trying to legalize abortion, they just made up a statistic that 10,000 women were dying from illegal abortions. It was never true. It was just, they needed to find a way to get people's sympathy and to make it seem like, oh, it'll be a whole lot safer if we make this legal.
You haven't been to a clinic. Okay, so the first step would be to make your appointment at the clinic and go and get an ultrasound.
I have an example that really surprised me. When I was filming a large documentary film about domestic violence, and we were in the Russian Republic of Dagestan, and we were also at a regional crisis center for women who experience abuse. And young girls came there who were 6 months pregnant, and they knew absolutely nothing about it. Nothing about condoms, nothing about contraception. And for them it was like, I'm pregnant, what is this? How is this even possible? Do you ever see cases like this?
It's just like that, and it's exactly the same in the U.S. We either have horrible sex education or no sex education at all. 2024 has been a record year in the United States for introducing and passing restrictive sex education bills. Like Ohio, there isn't a set curriculum for sex education, so a lot of high schools just teach abstinence. They just say don't have sex, which is not reality and also not helping prepare minors for what they need to do, how they need to protect themselves when they do have sex, from pregnancy, from STDs. And so a lot of the minors that I've worked with, they don't have access to birth control, and they don't know what options there even are for birth control. They're worried that they have to use their parents' insurance. They don't know that we have things in some states in the US called Title X clinics where they give minors access to birth control without using insurance. But I didn't know those existed until I started working here. A lot of the minors I've worked with used condoms because they know how to get them and they're relatively cheap in like drugstores, but those break. And if you don't know how to properly put one on, it can easier break. So that's something that we've noticed a lot of condoms breaking, and they don't have access or even know what the other options of birth control are that are more effective, like the pill or a patch or an implantation or shots they can get, like a vaccine kind of thing. They don't have any information on that until they go to the clinic to get their abortion. And then the doctors there can say, here's what you can do after this is over to now have birth control.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And I was just at, it was a March for Life rally down at the State House a few weeks ago, and our state attorney general was there talking. Like, they were shipping in students. This is the middle of the day on the Friday, and they're shipping in students on buses from middle schools to come to this anti-abortion rally. Like, you should leave those children in school. Why are you taking them out of school to be here? And yeah, you have all these children who, they do not even know what they are talking about. These are a bunch of kids who have never even had sex, standing there talking about.
Governor of Missouri said that they want to put limits on abortion in Missouri because they don't want to affect teen pregnancy. They want teen pregnancy to stay up where it is, which is that state has one of the highest rates of teen pregnancy in the country, because they don't want to lose population. They want to increase population growth on the backs of teenage girls and using them as incubators for their population growth.
It's vile to know that, we have these crisis pregnancy centers, which are fake health clinics that pretend to be abortion clinics, and they lure people.
I really don't understand what's the real goal of this clinic. For what?
Their goal is to manipulate people not to access abortion care. That is their goal. I've heard from people that have been lied to, that have went to a crisis pregnancy center, told them they were pregnant, and wanted an abortion, and the crisis pregnancy center locked them in a room, called their partner, and told their partner, hey, so-and-so just came in and they wanted an abortion. I've heard from people who have went to crisis pregnancy centers and been told that they are 6 weeks further along in their pregnancy than they are, so they think, oh, well, I can't get an abortion anymore. I'm gonna continue this pregnancy.
The first crisis pregnancy centers, which abortion rights supporters openly and without hesitation call fake clinics, first appeared in the United States as far back as 1981. Today, there are more than 2,500 of them. They offer patients ultrasounds, pregnancy tests, and tests for sexually transmitted infections. So where is the fake? According to pro-choice advocates, in these facilities, women are given misleading information about the actual stage of their pregnancy. Abortion risks are overstated, and patients are pressured, means to carry any pregnancy to term. OBGYNs in North Carolina reviewed 32 such centers in their state and found nearly 90% false information on their websites about abortion, the harms of condoms, and other contraception. Crisis pregnancy centers have continued receiving federal grants to conduct so-called values education programs in public schools. And the Donald Trump administration even appointed several employees from such centers to leadership positions.
The Monday after you died was pretty terrible. I had made plans the night before to meet up with Ross, a friend, to do some last-minute Christmas shopping downtown. Mostly just to make sure I got out of the house and didn't just spend the whole day sobbing in bed. But that morning, your grandma called, mostly to talk about the mass email and Facebook post I'd written to let people know what had happened. It was just too much for her and not the way she would have handled it. I tried to explain that I needed to try to preempt questions about the pregnancy from people I had seen or talked to, anyone I've interacted with in the previous few months. I was too pregnant to pretend it hadn't happened, and I wasn't willing to compound the grief of your loss by turning it into a source of shame, too. Finally, your dad intervened and grabbed the phone and told her to stop badgering me about it. What's done is done, he said. She should drop it. I sobbed in pain when he took the phone away, or maybe relief or guilt. I didn't want to cause her more pain, but I was so angry that she would presume to tell me how I should have handled this.
Let's talk in more detail about that group you turned to after what had happened. It was called Termination of a Wanted Pregnancy. For what reason did you personally need that?
So I joined this group really early after I found it while I was in Colorado. So like the internet search where I found it was, I did while I was in Colorado, and I wrote to somebody, and then I did get a message back from a woman. I think I didn't get the message back until I was back in Michigan. I feel like you're the only person. And so this woman wrote back to me, and she had also had to fly from Massachusetts to Colorado. She had had a procedure at the same clinic, the same doctor. She was even further along in her pregnancy when she got her diagnosis. She was 35 weeks when she got her diagnosis. And this letter from a sister, you know, like, and that was how she addressed me. It was just like, she was like, she knew exactly where I was, you know, just exactly. It was the kind of comfort, it just beyond it, like, to think you are so alone and to find out you're not. And it was once we were on Facebook that the group started growing quite a bit more. So I think we now have maybe 3,000 members. And it really has been a transformative process just to watch this group. Is unconditional kindness always. Everybody knows that if you're here because of shattering grief. You know, like you don't come to this group unless you have a baby who died. We are the club nobody wants to be part of.
Margot, why this way was better for you than, I don't know, a private psychologist or just conversation with your husband?
Oh, I did all that too. I just sort of like, you can't, I talked about it with my husband all the time. I talked about it with friends. I went to an in-person support group that I found locally. And again, the first time I was there, I was like, I'm not sure if you're gonna like me, guys, but I'll tell you what happened, and found unconditional, non-judgmental support there as well. I joined this online group. I did everything. I did, because I was also, I had, you know, it's like being hit by a semi. I read every grief memoir. I have read every pregnancy grief memoir out there, most of them. There's a few that have been published in the past few years, and I'm falling behind. But there was a period where like I had the bibliography in my head and heart. Well, that's one of the things that I learned, it turns out, right, is that shame thrives in silence, and shame is very destructive to us. When we live in shame, bad things happen. It's bad for our health. It causes addiction. It keeps people from connecting. So yeah, it was really, I'm glad I found all these places where a lot of it is just talking about it.
In the late 70s, David Reardon was an electrical engineer. Everything changed when he heard the story of Nancy Jo Mann, a singer from a Christian rock band. She was among the first in America to speak openly about the consequences of her abortion. That story made an extremely powerful impression on David. He decided to tell her story and also to gather testimonies from other women whose lives had been unbearably changed after the procedure. Reardon published one book, then another. He completed a doctoral dissertation in medical ethics and has spent more than 40 years studying the consequences of abortion. Today, David Reardon is the head of the Elliott Institute, an organization that conducts sociological research in this field and systematically collects data on how pregnancy and its termination affect women's lives over time.
You very often say in your interviews, and you write about it in your books, that abortions frequently lead to what you call post-abortion syndrome, which includes depression and even suicidal thoughts. Explain to me where this term came from, post-abortion syndrome.
So actually, I don't use that term too often myself. because there's a whole gamut of psychological reactions to abortion. Post-abortion syndrome was specifically identified by Dr. Vincent Rue, who had done counseling with Vietnam War vets, and also then with women, and he felt that many of the women were displaying traumatic symptoms like PTSD, so that he saw abortion as a form of trauma if they perceived the baby as a child and the death of the child. And so post-abortion trauma and PTSD is basically, avoidance behaviors. For example, many women report that they would always avoid driving anywhere near the abortion clinic because they couldn't see the abortion clinic because it would arouse negative feelings. So there's arousal of negative feelings, there's nightmares, or for some women, using a vacuum cleaner is traumatic because they think of the aspiration equipment that was used. So
You are surely aware of that well-known study conducted by the American Psychological Association. In 2008, they carried out extensive research and concluded that abortions are not associated in any way with an increase in psychological or any kind of psychiatric disorders.
Actually, the APA report from 2008 is often misrepresented as saying, in fact, their core statement, which I analyzed at depth in my review, was that in a certain sense, the core scientific issue is when, if ever, is abortion the sole cause of mental health issues, which is kind of where the proponents of abortion are kind of hiding behind that. Well, you can't prove that's the sole cause of suicide, for example. And I feel like I don't have to prove it's the sole cause of suicide. But I would not claim that abortion was the sole cause of their suicide. There's probably other issues that can combine for it, right? People are complex. Women themselves, the majority of women themselves, say, my abortion contributed to my mental health problems. If a woman says abortion is the sole cause of my mental health problems, I would not necessarily say, oh, I'm sure she's right. There could be multiple factors. But one of our most recent ones along that line was we looked at postpartum issues after a first live birth. Was a woman more likely to have postpartum psychiatric treatment rates if she'd had a history of miscarriage or abortion beforehand, before her first live birth? And it was dramatically higher for both abortion and miscarriage. So no studies have shown that women who have abortion anticipating that they will be spared depression or anxiety or whatever get those benefits. So there's no evidence of benefits. There's plenty of evidence of risks.
I was pregnant at 16. So I've experienced an unplanned pregnancy at a terrible time in my life. And I have my daughter. She's in her late 40s. And I couldn't imagine she changed my life. So many people that experience an unplanned pregnancy have a lot of other problems in their life going on. And getting rid of the baby doesn't make any of those problems better. It doesn't help you get a job. It doesn't help you with your education. It just simply is one more problem upon those. And, maybe the lifestyle I was living was fine for me, but I could not think of raising a child like that. So I needed to better myself to raise that child and give her everything that she should have.
From a medical standpoint, is abortion dangerous for a woman today or not?
No. Actually, pregnancy is more dangerous than abortion. Abortion is safer in many ways. It's safer when it comes to things like the amount of blood loss you have, the risk to the mother, the maternal mortality, the potential risk to internal organs. An abortion is not going to cause uterine prolapse. An abortion very rarely will cause an infection or bleeding to the extent that you would need to have a hysterectomy. The lies that I've seen have been things like abortions cause breast cancer. That's not true.
I remember that in my childhood, people used to say that abortion could lead to infertility. How do things stand with that today?
If that was the case, there would be a lot less babies. And there's no data that says you can't get pregnant after an abortion. Women get pregnant after abortions. Women get pregnant after miscarriages. Women get pregnant after ectopic pregnancies. Those are all types of abortions.
We do have an abortion pill reversal sign here. And that's a wonderful thing that we have, that if someone takes the abortion pill, that can be reversed. Right now we have 76 to 78% success with the abortion pill reversal for people that have decided not to.
What statements by pro-lifers seem to you, as a physician, completely unscientific and pure nonsense or fake?
So things that we've seen have been things like there is medicine that can reverse an abortion. The studies that looked at that found that it actually caused more blood loss for the woman, more surgical treatment. So no, that is a lie. That just doesn't happen. There was a bill here in Ohio to try and reimplant ectopic pregnancies. Can't do that. I can tell you as a surgeon, we cannot do that.
And you yourself, as a researcher, do you frequently encounter discrimination when you submit your own independent research to certain academic journals and are rejected because the journal holds a different position?
Yes, I mean, so usually our studies, the ones I've been involved in, if we aim for one of the top tier journals, if they publish similar studies from people proposing abortion and we publish something that says, oh, wait a minute, here's, if you analyze it this way, you get different results. Usually they say, oh, well, we don't think our readers will be interested.
The reason I'm asking is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I looked at your citation rate among scholars in academic publications, and it is quite high. But very often next to your comment or analysis, there is a specific note indicating that this particular publication was financially paid for by the author.
Okay, so most of our early studies, we did not pay publication fees, but bottom line is most journals now require publication fees. It's just in the last 15 years, there's been a shift in journals to require that you help pay the publication fees because they aren't, most of them are now online journals. They're not published, they're not printing journals that they sell to libraries. 95% of them now don't require you to pay a publication fee.
Could you tell me more about your Elliott Institute, the one that you founded?
Elliott Institute sounds like it's a big institute, but it's really just, you know, at one time we had 3 employees. Right now it's just myself. I've authored over 50 studies that have been published in medical journals.
You received a PhD degree in biomedical ethics from Pacific Western University. Since then, it has been reported that this university did not receive accreditation. Do you know why? And to what extent your degree is still considered valid today?
I believe the university reorganized under a different name. It's not affected me really. I mean, in a certain sense, the journals in the academic community accept that I'm doing good quality work, as demonstrated by the acceptance of these publications. So I know some people have tried to make a big deal about that, but it doesn't really bother me. I think I'm clearly an expert in my field. I know the subject in and out, and I do good quality work.
The email from Nicole, I saw that you had mentioned this. She had sent this a couple months ago. She had had a baby that was born prematurely and lived for a couple of hours and then died. Threw her into a terrific tailspin, however. She was extremely depressed over it. And she kind of wondered if dealing with that kind of thing would be something, you know, that the pro-life movement would be interested in being involved in.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring it up, because there are groups like, there's Prenatal Partners for Life. There may be some other groups out there too.
If you meet a woman who was on her way to have an abortion, and she tells you, the reason I'm going to have an abortion is, I simply don't have the money for this child. What can your organization realistically promise her so that she decides to keep this baby? Do you provide housing if she has nowhere to go with this baby? I don't know, do you pay for her gas? What specifically, is there some kind of assistance package?
Oh, there are tons of resources, absolutely. For instance, there's a couple of them in Chicago where a woman commits to staying for a year, 2 years, 3 years. They help her get into a job training program or finish school, that she'd be able to get a good job, to get daycare. You know, it's not like you just say to the woman, okay, have your baby and good luck with that. A lot of women don't really need any of that. All they need is somebody to say, yeah, you can do it. You're strong enough. We are supposed to believe that women are very strong and capable. Well, I believe it. They can do it. They can give birth and they can raise a child and be a good mother.
I really like your t-shirt, and you have a sign there that says, say the word abortion. Do you really believe that words themselves can actually provide some kind of help? Do they help in this case? When you simply begin saying it out loud over and over again?
Absolutely. I think just saying abortion and talking about abortion in the same way that you talk about other healthcare. If I'm sitting, I'm not scared to say, oh, I went to the dentist and got a cavity filled. Why is it so inappropriate for me to say, oh yeah, I went and got an abortion last week. I just went and accessed healthcare. Any other healthcare. I was having lunch a few years ago with my grandma, and we were sitting there, and I was talking about my abortion, and she was looking at me, she was like, shh. And I was like, no, you just sat here and talked about your colonoscopy. You just sat here and told me about your colonoscopy. So why can't I talk about my abortion? I actually think your colonoscopy might be more disturbing than my abortion.
Nancy Davis, thanks to wide media coverage of her story, is now a well-known figure in Baton Rouge. She has opened her own support foundation, raising money from supporters to help women in Louisiana access abortions, women just like her.
You know, even after the story went viral, Katrina Jackson, are y'all familiar with her? She called me on the phone and told me that they should not have denied me. And she told me, you know, I'm pro-life, so I don't agree with what you're doing, but I understand. So her doing that just made it even more, just gave me even more confirmation that what I was doing was right and that they were wrong. A lot of friends I've created from going through that.
Can you describe to me what your dream is today? What kind of future do you want for your state and for your daughters? How do you see it?
Everyone being free. I want my children to grow up and be able to they can make whatever decisions that they choose to make just because that they want to make it.
When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Ohio became one of the first states where a ban on abortions after 6 weeks went into effect. For many, that was the end of the debate, but not for attorney Jessie Hill. It was she who proposed the idea that would later change the political map of the country to put the right to abortion to a statewide referendum and enshrine it directly in the state constitution. It seemed impossible. Ohio is a pro-life state, a stronghold of Republicans, but Hill built a coalition of lawyers, doctors, activists, and ordinary residents, ensuring that citizens had the chance to vote on their future. In November 2023, 57% voted in favor of a woman's right to choose. This referendum would later be called the Ohio Miracle.
And then, you know, we won 57-43, so it was just huge. The day after the election, I spoke to a friend, another lawyer that I work with on many of these lawsuits, and she's a bit older than me, and she said, I was in college when Roe v. Wade came down, and I have to be honest, this felt bigger. This ballot measure, it felt bigger. Roe v. Wade, the people didn't control that, right? And this was like the people, we were controlling our own fate. You know, we were taking our state back, and it was really, yeah. Every time I think about it, I still get a smile.
I look at your emotional reaction and the way you describe it. And why was this personally important to you? I mean, you have 2 children, and you are not really in that situation yourself to be so deeply invested. Is it a professional challenge? Is it about money? Or is it some kind of activism, patriotism? What is it for you?
There was no money in it, I'll tell you that. I mean, yeah, it is partly that, I have devoted so much of my professional life to this, and so I care deeply about the issue, as a lawyer, but also, I have 2 daughters, and that's very important. They live in Ohio, right? So, I
thought about
their life. Yeah, their futures, just made me so angry to think that we would go backwards and that they would have less citizenship, really, than I did, less equality.
Do you have any results? I mean, how many did you persuade, and how many of them gave birth?
Yes, 1 out of 50 completely turn away. They'll accept the help that they need, and they'll have their baby. We've seen a lot of women drive past. They say, "Thank you for being here. We changed our mind. We just didn't know there are other options." Text us pictures. I mean, it's very beautiful. So at least 1 out of every 50.
Ann Scheidler and her supporters continue to stand vigil outside abortion centers, those that are still trying to operate despite restrictions and bans. There have also been major victories. Ann speaks with some satisfaction about the financial struggles of Planned Parenthood clinics. This is the most well-known medical network in the country, where abortions were also performed. After the Dobbs decision, many branches closed. Federal funding for the organization was reduced, and the flow of patients declined.
I know for sure that I've saved a couple of babies' lives by being out in front of an abortion clinic. That would be the best victory that I could claim, that's for sure. The very first time that happened was the Saturday, the day before Mother's Day, a number of years ago, and a girl went into the clinic. She did not take my literature, but she and her boyfriend came back out of the clinic about a half an hour later and came over and said to me, "We're going to celebrate Mother's Day. We're not going to go through with this," which was, an absolutely great feeling to know that, your presence there may have had an impact on someone's life.
Let's recall that specific moment when you decided to try to give birth again.
That one, there wasn't really a moment. I guess being a little unsure about how long it would be before I would try again. But the idea that that would be my only and last pregnancy was never, as long as it seemed plausible as long as I was healthy enough to try again, I think I knew that I almost certainly would.
You took another test and learned you were pregnant again. How did you behave? What thoughts were going through your mind?
Well, that's when I sought professional therapy, truly. But yeah, as soon as I was pregnant again, anxiety through the roof. Oh, here's the thing that I definitely didn't do. No baby shower, and I wouldn't buy anything until at 35 weeks in my second pregnancy. It was like, okay, I suppose we should maybe get a car seat.
Do you remember the moment when you were approaching the same term as with your first daughter? What was your feeling when you went to that screening again?
Oh, well, I had an extra screening in my pregnancy with my son at 25 weeks, just to be sure. So none of the screenings up until that point had shown any reasons to be worried, and they wouldn't normally do a screening at that point, but I wanted one just in case. The code that they put in for why they were doing it was maternal anxiety. I was more pregnant than I had ever been, and I still remember thinking, I think I expected to feel better at that point. Well, now I'm more pregnant, and it will be awful if something goes wrong, and hopefully it won't, but and at that point also I had been in support groups with so many people who had had other kinds of losses. So, I was good friends with people who had had stillbirths at 40 weeks and who had found out about a cord wrapped around their babies. I knew all of the other ways for babies to die.
I don't know if this sounds cynical, but does it get easier after the birth of another child?
Yes and no. I mean, there was a sense. But then after my son was born, the fact that I had been a mother since having my first baby was more obvious to me. Or like you know, like now that there was no hiccup in my identification with motherhood, I could see that actually the ways that I had felt about my first baby were the same, and also, you know, a year further removed, knew that I still loved her so much that. I don't know, the reality of her as being my first child became more real once my son existed. I no longer felt that sense of like, oh, and now maybe I won't get to parent. You know, there wasn't that, like, my identity as a mother was no longer in question. Whatever happened at this point, I am a mother, you know? I guess I'm ending this journal with 2 huge sighs of relief. I submitted my edited book manuscript to the publisher, and the anatomy scan yesterday looked normal.
Your little brother is healthy. I started crying about 10 minutes into the hour-long scan right after the doctor told us the sex. I don't even know why. Probably because I associate ultrasounds with getting terrible, life-altering news. And seeing this baby on the screen moving around, bringing his hand to his mouth and yawning, and just being so damn human already made me feel uncomfortably aware how fucking devastating I'll be if this baby dies too. The doctor doing the scan stopped and said not unkindly, "What's going on? Do you need a moment?" And I told her, "My first baby died in December and ultrasounds are a little emotional for me, but you can keep going." She was really understanding after that and started offering a lot of little reassurances. When taking extra time to look at something, she'd explain that everything looked normal, she just needed a different angle. She apologized later for not knowing about my pregnancy with you, and I was shocked that it isn't in my chart. I feel like that should be in huge red letters on every page. Terminated a wanted pregnancy at 6.5 months, likely to be a fucking basket case. We'll tell Brian's mom this weekend, and I'll start telling other people as I see them, although I wish it were still acceptable to just go into confinement for the duration of a pregnancy and reappear. I don't want congratulations. I don't want to hear that everything is going to be okay. I don't want to be asked how I'm feeling. I don't want to be asked about the sex. I don't want to be asked if this is my first. I just don't want to face this incredibly personal, terrifying, difficult thing with the whole goddamn world watching. All I want is for this baby to live. Love, Mom.